So you were like the first, the youngest VP ever at Wells Fargo, weren't you?
So I'm told, yes.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s.
Yeah. So tell everyone about your background. You're so interesting.
So I am a serial entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was 12, and it was out of necessity. My parents were gone, and I was the youngest of 9, and so we needed to be able to keep heat on the house. And so you look around, and you're like, no one's going to hire me. So I started my first company, had employees that same year. Was fortunate to be able to hire much of the football team to do the work, and I just had to do the management and leadership, which was kind of a fun way to start. Fast forward a bit of time, and as I'm going to college, the deregulation, which I'm going to take an aside on this, deregulation of banking happened. And banking was moving from, you guys would not believe this, banks used to be open from 9 to 3, Monday through Friday, and they all had the exact same rate. For mortgages, for loans, for everything else. And then there was this other group called home savings and loans. And then there were thrift companies, but that was really it. All of it was regulated by the government. And through the Reagan years, they deregulated that. Well, the banks realized that they needed to be able to take an aggressive stance once they started competing because they had different rates and different products. And so I got recruited by Wells Fargo Bank in the 80s. To lead a group and help design the programs of how what you guys all now have is commonplace, but you get a checking account, you get a credit card, then you get a home loan, and all of the pieces that come together. Yes, it's what Wells Fargo eventually, 35 years later, got in trouble for because they abused the processes, but it was interesting to see. The reason I bring that up is as you were going through the tokenization and where we're moving in this, when I started in finance, the most powerful institution in the world was the federal banking system. And it was because basically everybody's capital was not necessarily tied up in Wall Street, it was tied up in the banks. And the banks lent to companies, even companies like General Electric and such, right? And so when we were heading into an inflationary model, which I believe we're doing now, the Fed could adjust that by moving the rates up, and then they could move it back down. But in today's DeFi world, people don't borrow from banks very often. Banks invest in other funds such as what we put together. So that's an interesting look at how it has changed tremendously and how you do have decentralized finance. And we've been a big part of that.
Yeah.
So in '92, I left the bank, and it was the first economic downturn that I went through as an adult. And the reason I left the bank is I had an opportunity for some clients to raise capital for them. They needed capital because the bank was no longer lending. And I had other clients that had a tremendous wealth and didn't like that they weren't getting 12 to 14% on their CD rates. Yes, that's actually what CDs used to pay. Okay, so they were dropping down to 8% and they wanted to be able to make a higher return. So fast forward that became Resolute Capital Partners, which is still a company that we own today. It's a family office and a private equity firm. We invest in a lot of fintech early stage. Vertalo being one of them. We looked at that and said that was an exciting piece, place to be, especially looking at the secondary market. Because one of the challenges of being in the alternative space is that there is very little liquidity, and that can change the entire model. As a matter of fact, I was listening to JP Morgan, CEO of JP Morgan chat on Bloomberg last week, and he was saying that the liquidity risk that they perceive is not worth the difference in the yields that you're getting in the public markets versus the private markets. And so if you look at that and say, okay, what's the liquidity risk? Well, it means that you can't be liquid. You can't have all of your assets in alternative investments, but you definitely can have a chunk of them. Mm-hmm. And if you can have them and have liquidity, all of a sudden that is a total game changer. So that's why we're here. That's why we're part of Vertalo. I will tell you about Rowe Capital Group. Rowe Capital Group is a team of professionals that came out of Resolute Capital. We've raised and managed billions of dollars literally over the last 25 years now, almost 30 years, I guess. Yeah. And through that, we've had most of the bruising that you could possibly believe. Okay? Meaning when you kind of get out there and you set new patterns and they haven't set the rules and regulations, the government regulates by coming in and saying, no, we don't like that, we're going to fine you. Okay? Even if you have the best attorneys in the world, which we do generally, the best accountants in the world, there's still some times that you get crosshairs with regulators. And I never have liked that. I've sat on a committee for state and federal on how to regulate financial services companies. I'm very much pro-regulation. but pro-regulation that can actually be managed. And so that's where Rowe Capital came about. Over the years, we built an amazing team. And that team is sitting partly over here with Angela, Kelly, Tony, Jackie, and Steve's floating around somewhere in there. Steve's in the back of the room. And Steve's wife, Candace, and a number of others that have been part of that team. And that team approached me a while ago and said, we've got an idea. We think this is a business in of itself. Because we constantly wanted to outsource as much as we possibly could, but we couldn't find the soup to nuts, the beginning to end. And so I said, gosh, you know, what you're really talking about here is private satellite launch companies. Launch velocity, right? Because if you think about our space race, for those of us that were around when we first went to the moon, was the goal to get to the moon? That's what every entrepreneur thinks. It's about getting to the moon. They call it even the moonshot. But the real goal is to get to the moon and get the astronauts back to Earth, right? And so most full cycle entrepreneurs don't know what it's like to go through the beginning, the moonshot, the success with that, and then the exit or sale or wind down or whatever has to happen on that and getting the astronauts back to the Earth. And that's launch velocity. They get you know, you can be the astronaut and build that and go for what the moonshot is, and launch velocity is about getting them back. Yeah. So it's the back end service from everything from tax to compliance to investor communications to marketing. It's the pieces, we called it, we started with Build-A-Bear. And then the three ladies sitting at the table said, well, we really like Build-A-Bear, badass bitches, which was probably a much more thing. And if you haven't seen the podcast that Jackie and Candace do, it's called WTF. If you haven't listened to it, it's excellent. It's Women Talk Finance. So that's it. I know we haven't talked much there, so ask me questions now, since neither you nor I follow script.
So you just finished a master's of law. How did you fit that in, and why did you do that? I mean, you seem to understand the markets. Is there something about legality that you're concerned about? You lawyering yourself up?
I have an MBA, and fortunately I have a graduate from Harvard University and a fair amount of experience in the industry. And we have a very pro-education company. Yeah. If you ever saw our statistics on it, we have a number of highlighted people. Yes, as Tony says, I'm a nerd. A number of our team members had started going through they had their masters or MBAs, but they started going through these masters of law, which wasn't quite a JD, but it covered almost all the highlights specifically. You didn't have to go through criminal law, which hopefully all of us always avoid. But you go through much of the different things. And so I found an international program that was supported by Northwestern University and IE University, which is in Spain. And I got to study in Madrid and Chicago.
It's incredible.
And amazing group. I will tell you that for those people that are in the room that are U.S. attorneys, the international attorneys are an amazing group of people. They run circles around many of the attorneys that we see in practice here.
So you're not just about education for you and your team, but you've also been educating startups and running startups from like their earliest stages, and even before the moonshot. Like, so what are some of the lessons that you've learned in mentoring and coaching early stage companies and getting them to scale up? Are you a blitz scale guy? I mean, where do you fall on this?
It's really we were talking about this. My daughter and I were talking about this. That it's interesting how an entrepreneur will say, "I've got an idea," and then they want to test it to see if it's actually saleable. Right? So they kind of see and say, if this fit this need, would you guys pay for it? And then you have the MBAs that are like, oh yeah, and the attorneys are, oh yeah, we've got to get the LLC in place, and we've got to get the business licenses in place, and we've got to get all the things that are actually really, really important. But if a customer never happens, none of that shit matters. Right? I mean, it just does not matter. So we're really early stage about testing the idea to see if there is a concept. And the gentleman who hired me back at Wells Fargo Bank 35 years ago, a guy named Bill Fisher. You can check him out. We've done a number of ventures together, including Tiburon Group, which is a fintech investment group out of Europe. Bill had a successful exit of Get Smart, which was the precursor essentially to Lending Tree. So he and I have been, partners for now almost 35 years in doing various ventures. And the vice chairman of Wells Fargo ended up being the dean of the B School at Stanford. I was teaching part-time at Harvard, and I was doing international finance, and the dean approached Bill and said, hey, would you guys write an executive workshop on how to raise early-stage capital for Stanford?
Yeah.
And I'm like, Silicon Valley, that's a little intimidating, right? I mean, yeah, we come out of Silicon Valley, but this is the place of starting early stage capital. So we did. It's called 6 Secrets of Raising Startup Capital. It got published. It got picked up by the World Bank. We actually traveled around the world coaching entrepreneurs. Yeah. Tim Draper's university sponsored us for quite a while on how to raise capital. And it really walks through the pains of if you don't get that first round of capital, and I'm not talking your A round. Most companies never see an A round. Yeah. Right? Never. They get friends and family, and then they get to sometimes an early stage company like ours that's a private equity, and we're in the about $750 to $5 million investment range, and we like that early stage way before the A. Yep. And so that's what we do. Yeah, that's great. So how do folks get in touch with you? You're going to be here today, right? I'm here today. And how do folks reach you and learn more about your firm, or you're going to be around to meet? Well, it's this group here, because I'm really not part of Vertalo. It's an Vertalo. I am not a part of Vertalo either. But like Rowe Capital Group, I'm not part of Rowe Capital Group. I advise to them. I'm the financial backer to give them their early stage launch. But it's a group of professionals that come out of our Resolute Capital learnings, and they've been able to take that platform and bring that forward to the group of entrepreneurs that are leading businesses there. So the group to talk to is again, Kelly, Angela, Tony, Steve, if they're around, Jackie, if you see her as well. You can chat with me. I'm just not as interesting as them and know far much less than they do. So I just kind of know that high level stuff that they let me know. This is great. Tom, thanks for sharing with the audience here. Thank you. And look forward to talking more of this. Thank you. Tom Powell, thank you so much.